with John Constable in his home in Watertown. And John, we'd like you to tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, where do you want me to start? That's the first thing, because it goes back a long ways.
When were you born?
Well, personal history.
Uh-huh.
I was born in August 27th, 1916 in Lavon Park in New Jersey. That was the East Orange section. My dad was chief engineer for Thomas A. Edison at the time. And so we lived there until 1922, when the whole family moved to Constable.
In 1922?
Yeah, that's when the family moved there. And my father and I spent the previous summer getting the hall in shape because they didn't have too many facilities, and they had to put in a bathroom and a few other things to get ready. And once he got those done, by then we moved up the following year. And we stayed at what was then the Schwank Hotel, which is now the Hotel Parquet. And the main lobby room of the hotel is pretty much the same as it was even in those days. I remember the only trouble is they've changed some of the color. It used to be a bilious green, two-tone green, because it was wainscoted on the bottom. But it hasn't changed basically since those years. And then we lived in Constableville a few winters, and I remember them very vividly. I went to school there, believe it or not. And then we moved to Lowville in 1926 because it became quite difficult to maintain the hall in the wintertime because the snows were so heavy and keeping the roads open, and heating really wasn't a problem in the hall. It was getting ready for the heating season. It took about 2 men about 6 months to get enough fuel together to keep all the fires and fireplaces going. So we moved to Lowville, and Dad was killed in 1926. And then from there on in, it's rather a heterogeneous selection of places that we were. We lived in Lowville for a few years after that, and then my grandmother and my uncle convinced my mother that Europe was the place to have an education. So we went to Europe, and I went to school in Paris for 2 years, in Switzerland 1 year.
Then you must speak French.
Well, I was there long enough so that I thought French when I came back here. It was rather hard because the school I was in, nobody spoke English in it. And 2 years of that, and I had to become a native or go out of business, one of the two. It's something I would never recommend anybody to do today, because at that age you don't really appreciate where you are and what you're seeing and what you're going through.
And how old were you when you were in?
7, 8 years old, and that's pretty young to be over there. Well, actually, I was closer to 9 at the time. But the problem was that you really didn't understand the whole background. Like we spent one summer in England on the Kent coast, which was a beautiful area. I remember that very vividly. And then we spent one summer on the Mediterranean down below Genoa, a place called Vevey. And we stayed there that summer, and then the following year we came back. And we stayed at the hall that summer, and then I went to Kent School of Kent, Connecticut. This was not considered an English prep, or Connecticut, a New England prep school, I should say. At that time, it was a self-help school. Everybody worked. And I think it was one of the greatest backgrounds I ever got, because it didn't make any difference who you were or what you had. Nobody knew. You got 25 cents a week allowance. You weren't allowed to have any money in your possession anywhere. And everybody had a job assignment, which some of them were permanent, like if you were on the dishwasher or the China clippers, we used to call it. You got that for a week, and you could pay dishes 3 times a day. It was quite a job. We cleaned the dining hall, we set up the tables, we kept all the rooms clean, the washrooms, the hallways, even stoked the furnaces.
And this is when you were 7 to 9 years old?
No, this was after he came back. I was 13, 14.
13, 14.
But it was a very great education. It was a 5-year course. It was 13 when I went there, and I was 18 the summer I graduated. But it really was a great experience. I wouldn't say that the school is in that category today at all. It's one of the so-called New England prep schools. But at that time, we just had 3 old farmhouses good old Connecticut farmhouses that Father So had commandeered and made a boys' school out of it. And his whole idea was that everybody should be self-supporting, self-sustaining, and be able to be self-help.
In other words, your father ran this school.
No, not my father. Father still.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Dad passed away in '26 from the accident. But this man was under the Order of the Holy Cross. It was an Episcopal order. And he's still famous in the educational field for what he had accomplished with boys. And most of the boys that were there, on the average, we never knew what anybody paid because he interviewed the parents and found out what their financial situation was. And if he liked them and felt that the boy was someone he wanted in his school, well, you came. Some of them didn't pay anything. I know one group from Philadelphia, the very wealthy people, they're very well known even today, but they paid $6,000 to have their son go there. It might have been what you call a little blackmail. But these people felt that their son needed this training, so that's why they offered the school that amount of money to have him come there. It was quite an experience. I really enjoyed it. And I look back on it now, and I've been back there, the 50th reunion. There's no comparison. It's now doing the prep school, which I don't agree with.
Not the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. Well, that's enough for that educational. Then I graduated, and of course, at that time, family fortune had been gone for a good many years. So I was able to get a position with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers of the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania district, and I became a part of a survey party on the Delaware River. And we worked from Trenton, New Jersey to ship John Light, checking on the dredging companies who were dredging the river to maintain ocean-going vessels as far up the river as Trenton, New Jersey. And that was quite an education by itself, too. And I spent one winter at that, and I decided the North Country may be cold, but it's a cold that you can heat. That was the coldest winter I ever spent working on that thing, Dave. So I came back, and I was able to go to work for Mr. E.J. Noble of the Lifesaver Corporation. And I started out in Elmira as a territory representative, and then from Elmira I went to Binghamton, and they put me into Rochester. And of course the territory kept enlarging all the time, but not much additional help.
Now,
Mr.
what
Noble,
did you do? You were a salesman?
I was a company representative. I'd call on wholesalers, kept them in line if I could, and then we also called on stores in our spare time and watching displays and putting up displays for them, promotional work along with it. And I covered all the way through to Plattsburgh from Rochester and all the way south through to Lowellville, and then I went down into Hornell and Corning and all through the southern tier.
You were selling lifesavers?
I was with the Lifesaver representative. At that point, it was practically all calling mostly on wholesalers because you didn't have much time else to spend the rest of the time driving. And there was you learn an awful lot very quickly. And it is a very tiring type of thing because you're on the move all the time. You never have any routes. Of course, I had a place in Rochester where I lived, but it was only there about maybe 1 week out of 5, 1 week out of 6. And in the meantime, I was trying to keep track of what is now known as Constable Hall, keep it going, keep the farm operating to support the thing because I surely couldn't do it on the salary I was getting there. But I was able to keep the thing together by running the farm. And that kept that kind of off my back. But every chance I had, I was in there doing work, trying to maintain this and fixing that. Well, then they wouldn't give me any help. And Mr. Noble and I had a few words over that. So I told him that I had another position and that I was leaving him and come pick up his equipment, and I left him. And the irony of that was after I left, they hired 2 men. So I figured that I'd kind of taken for a ride for a while. But that's the way business is. You do what you can and do what you can. And I went to work for the William Wrigley Company, and I had sold North Territory. The difference between working for Wrigley and working for Lifesavers was tremendous because they had a branch office in New York City, and I was under that jurisdiction. But I was called down to meet Mr. Wrigley personally, and he told me how he wanted me to run things, and told me that when I was on the road I represented the Wrigley Company, and that expenses didn't mean anything, that I represented them and I should travel the way he did, which was very nice, so that's what I did. And I was with them till until the war broke out.
So you sold chewing gum.
Yeah, and that was really what I call one of the higher class company jobs on the road, because practically it was all wholesale business. I was calling on wholesalers and representatives and so on. It was very good. One thing they did, and most people probably never would have heard of this, all their men that went in service, they paid the difference between their pay for 1 full year.
That was certainly a plus.
He really then cared for his people.
He did a very good job, yeah.
One thing that I heard about him is that someone asked him one time how come when his products was selling so well, he spent so much money on advertising. And his remark was, if you've got a train going down the track 90 miles an hour, do you take away the engine?
That's right. And this was his theory because as a representative for him, there were no holds barred. Whatever you felt was good for your territory, you could do. And I never had a bit of criticism on anything that I did, and that amazed me. Because a lot of it, you couldn't stop and wait for a corporate answer. I mean, there were some things that came up that you just had to handle. Just one incident. In 39-40, remember they had the big maneuvers at Plattsburgh and all in northern New York, and we had trucks running around with the tank painted on the side of them because we didn't have any equipment. I had a big wholesaler named Malone Dufour Brothers. They ordered in a carload of gum. Well, now they weren't the only people in northern New York that were trying to get into the Army business at that time. I get the invoice that they've got a whole carload. That's a lot of boxes of chewing gum.
Right.
What do you do with it? So I went up to see them. Well, we're going to get all the business for the Army while they're up in this area. Well, I said, that's fine, but you've got competition even coming in from Syracuse. You have Watertown with wholesalers, and you've gotten to see it. You even had some little guy over in Saranac Lake, and a little guy over in Lake Placid, Tupper Lake. I said, they're all going to be vying for some of this. Well, we think we can move it. Well, I said, I don't think you can. So I went around to all my key dealers, said, look, if you need something, let me know. We'll transfer this stuff around because there's no point letting it sit up in Malone until it rots. Because if it isn't sold in a certain time, it's taken off the market. So I went around and distributed it to all my other dealers, and we came out of it with no loss, but I'm sure that they would have had a terrific loss there. There's no question about it. But this was the type of thing that you ran into.
Well, that speaks well for you.
You didn't wait and call Chicago and get an answer on it. You went ahead and said, well, this is my territory, because they told me you run it, it's your territory. So you get yourself out of trouble, because I hate to have that loss chalked against me as far as sales are concerned, because it looked nice at the end of the year to have a little increase in sales every year. It didn't hurt the salary situation a bit either.
No.
How many years did you work for him?
I was with them 2.5 years till the war broke out. And I went in service. And let's see, that was February 2nd of 42. I had the December 7th, of course, was the so-called turning point of most everybody's life at that time. And I had to take a little time to get things for the farm and the hall straightened out so I could leave it and get rid of the business turned over to them. So I went down. I enlisted. And people say, what'd you enlist for? Well, I said in Lewis County I was 16th in the draft, so it didn't make much difference what I did.
No, you'd get there anyway.
I knew that the situation I was going anyhow. I was single. I had no actually responsibility as far as the nation was concerned, so you got the greetings and you go sign up and take your chances.
So which branch did you go into?
I went in the Air Force. And, well, you get a varied career in the Army. I started out at Fort Niagara. I think everybody that came from the North Country here went through Syracuse and Fort Niagara. And I ended up in Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and from there I went to Kansas City and to a Air Force TWA conditioning school. It was run by TWA. I went from there to Morrison Field, West Palm Beach, Florida. And that was quite an experience. We were the first group in there, and they had this airfield. We didn't have any MPs, we didn't have any fences, no gates or anything else. It was wide open. It was